Here's something of an unexpected bonus. This tree behind the greenhouse here is a Cornelian cherry, Cornus mass. It's not a cherry, it's a dogwood, but it has these edible cherry-like fruits, and it's got quite a lot of them on the tree this year. And this will be my first time tasting them. Now, I do understand from watching, I think it was a video on Learn Your Land, excellent channel by the way, if you like foraging, especially American based foraging. Learn Your Land is a very, very good resource. He seems like a lovely chap as well. But anyway, Cornelian cherry. You can't pick these off the tree and eat them. They would be inedibly bitter. So we have to wait for them to fall and then pick them up off the ground and then obviously wash them. So I'm going to have a little scout around on the ground in there and see if any have fallen and are ready to be tasted. So this is the tree, and there aren't so many fruit on this side because this is the shady side, but I'll have a look around in here and see what there's one. Seems like it's in good condition. There's another one. Might not be quite so nice, that one, but I'll pick them all up, and then we've got a few choices. There's another one down there. That one's very ripe. That appears to be it for the moment. We might be right at the start of the season for these, so oh, there's another one. And of course I've got to beat the blackbirds to these. These will fall down. The blackbirds will be scouting around here in the leaf litter, looking for the same thing I am. And therefore, I won't get them all. Anyway, we've got 5 little fruits, not necessarily all good to eat, but there they are. Let's get them down to the house, give them a wash, and have a little taste. Now, as I understand it, these have to be really, really ripe before you eat them. And some of these aren't, even though they've fallen off the tree. This one probably does actually need keeping for another day or two to ripen it further before eating, but this gives us an opportunity to cross-section one without hopefully squishing it everywhere. So let's have a look what they look like inside, if I can get it apart. So there is a single hard seed in here, like a cherry. So it does resemble a cherry inside. Single large hard seed, actually nowhere near as much flesh as a cherry. But I don't know that that one's going to be good to eat actually, but we've got a couple in here that probably are. There's one that's very ripe. So I'm still going to cut this in half because I want Jenny to taste it as well with me. So this one, when I try to cut it, it's a lot more pulpy. And I'm going to give Jenny the bit with no seed. And I'm going to have the bit with the seed and then spit the seed out. Thoughts?
Tastes like a cherry, actually.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that there is, yeah, I agree. It does taste like a cherry. I think there's an extra flavour in there that's a bit like, it's a bit like persimmons, khaki fruit, Sharon fruit. That kind of slight, you know those big orange things that I get and ripen them? There's a bit of that to it, I think.
All right.
No? Let's try one this one's not quite so ripe, but I think it'll still be good. So the flesh in the one that's unripe is still kind of yellowish, but as they ripen it looks like the flesh does turn redder. So there's another one that's not quite so ripe, so that might be a bit more tart. Oh boy, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's very bitter.
Sour and bitter. And astringent. A bit like that's a bit like eating a sloe, although not quite as severe as a sloe. Yeah, definitely have to wait until they are dark maroon before you eat them, which means I'm not even going to try. Well, actually, I don't know. There's another one there. No, I don't think it's ripe enough yet, so I'll probably hang on to those two and let them ripen fully. It makes you wonder what this one, which is even less ripe than the two we've just tasted, is going to be like. But of course you want to know, don't you? Boy, oh boy. That dries your mouth out with its astringency. And actually it has less flavour than the slightly more ripe one, because the fruit just isn't juicy, so the flavour hasn't come out of the flesh. So there we go. I won't waste that little bit there though. Cornelian Cherries, my first taste. They have got a unique flavour of their own as well, a slightly unique aroma, which I think is rather nice. I don't know how many of those we'll get to eat because the tree's in a bit of an awkward position. But anyway, I'm glad to have tried that. It's time for the comment positivity section, where we're just going to pick out some comments that made me smile, or perhaps asked interesting questions. So why is the rookery so quiet in berry season? So in our little bit of woodland, we've got a rookery, that is a colony of rooks, crow type birds, corvids, and they are very, very noisy and raucous sometimes. They're quiet at the moment. Actually, they're probably not quiet, they're just not there. At certain times of the year when they finish nesting, and I think they have a couple of broods, the adults and the new young all disappear off somewhere, presumably to some big rook party. And I think probably they're mingling to select partners from other rookeries to keep the diversity in the gene pool. And then at some point late in the year, they come back, and they'll come back to this roost and start preparing for next year's nesting. So they're quiet because they're not there. Interestingly, when they disappear off, the jackdaws move in. So jackdaws are smaller species of corvid. They move in and they nest in the rookery, but jackdaws are a lot more quiet. And when the rooks come back, the jackdaws mostly move out, but jackdaws and rooks do socialise and roost together. Rooks are about twice the size of jackdaws. So it is really weird to see them all kind of mingling and socialising together. But yeah, the short answer is the rookery is quiet because the rooks aren't there. Any steps being taken to tackle the ash dieback? As I showed in a previous video, ash trees in this country are being destroyed by this fungal disease, ash dieback, quite extensively. We're losing a lot of our ash trees. In fact, we've got a large ash tree on our property which is in a severe state of ash dieback. Here's a picture of it. This tree is going to have to come down, unfortunately. And so when I talked to the local tree officer and the tree surgeon, I was talking to them about ash dieback, and apparently there are some signs of hope. So some trees that have been pruned really hard have recovered quite nicely. So in some cases where you've got a large ash tree that's dying, that's got all this dieback, they cut it back really, really hard in spring. It's produced lots and lots of new growth, and it appears to be fighting back against the dieback fungus. There are also trees that are exhibiting some kind of natural resistance, or appear to be. So it's possible that we're going to see that we'll lose most of our existing ash trees, and maybe the surviving ones, the ones that are a little bit tolerant or resistant to the fungus, will recolonize and fill in those spaces. I hope so, because a lot of our woodland is ash, and without that something else will fill the gap, but it won't be the same. Now in our own woodland here, the ash tree that we've got to take out, I will replace with something else. I will replace probably with something smaller, like a crabapple or maybe cherry or something like that. One of our native species, but something that I probably won't try and plant an ash there because it would probably just fail. Sycamore would be a choice, but we've got lots of sycamore on the site already. Please show us more of your stone carvings. It went by in a flash. Okay, well, here's that. So this is the carved pebble mentioned in that comment, which briefly appeared in my organising my fossil collection video. I'm not absolutely sure whether it's a good idea for me to talk too much about this pebble. It may get me in trouble, but we'll get to that bit in just a moment. So this is a limestone pebble that I picked up in 2004 on the shore of Lulworth Cove. We went there on a family holiday. We were down in Dorset on a family holiday camping, and we spent the day at the beach. The kids splashed around in the water, went rock pooling, you know, all of the usual beach stuff, picnics and whatnot. And I sat on the beach and, well, I didn't intend to carve this pebble at all. On our way along the beach, we also did a litter pick. And one of the things I picked up was a watchmaker's screwdriver that somebody had left. When I say a watchmaker's screwdriver, I mean something like this. a little eyeglasses screwdriver perhaps. It's got a kind of rotating end. Not this one. I don't have the original screwdriver I found on the beach that day anymore, but it was something similar to this but made of plastic. So we picked up a whole bunch of litter. That screwdriver was one of the items in it. And I just happened to notice that the screwdriver was hard enough to scrape away at this limestone, which is a bit harder than maybe soapstone, but it can be carved with a hardened steel screwdriver. So I sat there while the kids were doing their splashing around and catching shrimps and things, enjoying the sunshine and the waves, and I roughed out the carving of this fish. And I didn't really intend to carve a fish at first. I actually just started by carving the eye. And then I thought, actually, no, we can fit a fish in here. So, do you know what? I'm going to put a light on. I don't know how well you can actually see this on camera. So I'll put just a light on so that we can have a little bit of grazing illumination on this thing. So that you can see the carving perhaps a little bit better. So anyway, yeah, I didn't intend to carve this fish. But what happened in the end was I carved the outline of the fish and the head and the fins and the tail, and started marking out the bits that are not the fish, which is all of the bit here. When I got back to campsite in the evening, sat down with a can of beer and worked out the scales and carved away the bits that aren't raised. So the fish is actually in relief on this stone because everything that's not the fish has been carved down to a lower level. It took me a few hours to make this, and I ended up also carving Lulworth Cove, June 2004. That's really rough actually on that side. I spent a little bit more time just outlining and finessing the fish. Anyway, that's what that is. Now, why would it be a problem for me to mention this in a video? Well, the problem is that the Coast Protection Act 1949 says, subject to the provisions of this section and notwithstanding anything contained in any other enactment, it shall be unlawful to excavate or remove any materials other than minerals more than 50 feet below the surface, on, under or forming any part or any portion of the seashore to which the provisions of this section are applied. Now, internet people like to interpret that sometimes as meaning that you can't take anything home from the beach. You can't pick up a stone and take it home, even though I think probably most kids who've ever been to the beach have come home with a shell or a stone or fossil or something in their pocket. I mean, obviously, collecting fossils is kind of approved. Most of the fossil beaches on the Dorset coast have signs, official signs from the local council saying what you can expect to find on the beach. And they tell you not to dig in the cliffs, but they actually tell you what kind of fossils you can pick up and keep on the beach. So, except the Coast Protection Act says you really shouldn't. So, nuance is required here. And this being the internet, nuance is not always in plentiful supply, and so I have had people tell me that I shouldn't pick up stones or fossils. I shouldn't pick up anything from the beach. But consider, if we were to apply that enactment to the utmost of its literal form, it would also have been unlawful for me to do the litter pick, because litter on the beach is materials on or under the surface, and so if you take the strictest sense of the 1949 Coast Protection Act, litter picking is illegal on the beach. Now that obviously is stupid, and if we are to take this Coast Protection Act as absolute, then it's also breaking the law to go to the beach and return with a single grain of sand adhering to your boots. You are removing materials from the beach if you've got sand on your boots when you walk back to your car. So obviously some kind of nuance might be appropriate. So I couldn't possibly recommend that you just go to the beach and start collecting stones and taking them. And in some places, people have been prosecuted for that. Budleigh Salterton in particular is a place where they have very beautiful pebbles on the beach, and they have bylaws protecting them. And people have been fined considerable sums for taking home a few pebbles from the beach. Or they've been made to travel a long way to return the pebbles to the beach in order to avoid the fine. So yes, this is a stone from Lulworth Cove. That was more than 20 years ago now, so I don't know if the Pebble Police are still after me, or if it comes to pass that as a result of me blabbing about having taken a pebble from Lulworth Cove 21 years ago, if that comes back to bite me, I suppose I shall have to go to Lulworth Cove and toss this back in the stones on the beach. Be a shame if I had to, but we'll cross that bridge if we come to it. Anyway, that's the story of my carved fish pebble. Stone carving is not a thing I've done any of apart from this one time, and it was very much impromptu, just because I happened to find a tool that I noticed was suitable for carving the rocks on the beach. Wild fruits are really abundant this year. I suppose it's the heat and the dry weather. Yes, I think so. So despite having a really, really dry spring and summer, the blackberries, the plums, the apples, the elderberries as well, all of the wild fruits are really, really abundant and good this year. So what's going on there? Without all of that water, how have we got so much fruit? Two answers, I think, to that. One is that certainly for the plums, so the wild plums and wild cherries, there is this particular time in early spring where all of the trees are flowering, but the risk of frost is not usually past. And so some years, the trees all flower, they set embryo fruits, and then we get a hard frost, and all those little embryo fruits get frozen off the trees, and we get a really, really poor crop of plums and cherries. That didn't happen this year. So we had a warm, dryish spring. So all of the blossom just got its chance to open and stay dry. It was warm and dry, so the bees could come out and pollinate it all. And so the fruit set on the plums and cherries was amazing. So in fact, some of the plum trees, some of the wild cherry plum trees I've seen have been so laden with fruit this year that the branches have snapped. So they are so weighed down with their own fruit that the branches have snapped. The other thing I think is that obviously for an established tree, it's got its roots right down. And if the water table is down there anyway, in the bottom of valleys especially, then the tree can still get water. And the hot, dry weather allows the trees to produce lots and lots of sugar, because sunlight is what they need to photosynthesize and produce sugar from carbon dioxide and water. And so the abundant sunshine has enabled those trees to really pump the sugar into the fruits. That means the fruits can develop and obviously become really nice and sweet. So the wild fruit harvest this year, and including some of the things that humans don't eat so much, like hawthorn, it's looking really, really abundant, despite the very dry conditions. On the subject of fruit, here's a comment I meant to feature in that section, but for some reason didn't have printed on my script. Someone said, silly question, I know we always just call them all blackberries, but I was told that blackberries should be small, bullet hard, and should be picked around September, and what's available now, large and soft, are actually dewberries. Have you heard this? Now, the distinction stated here is not consistent with my understanding of the differences, at least for where I live. Regionality is important with these things. Here's an explanation of what dewberries and blackberries are where I live. In the UK, dewberry is the name for Rubus caesius, and blackberries are Rubus fruticosus. Important thing to note here is that in other parts of the world, dewberry and blackberry may refer to completely different species. Those are just common names. But here, dewberry is this thing. It looks a lot like a blackberry, but the dewberry fruit is often irregular or incomplete. In some cases, there might only be one druplet present. Druplets are the individual little fruit blobs there. They're called druplets, which means a small drupe. A drupe is like a plum. It's a fruit with a single hard seed. And this is compared to blackberries, which are normally composed of a complete spherical or ovoid cluster of druplets. Dewberry fruits are covered with a whitish waxy bloom that makes the fruit look blue-grey. The stems are often also covered with the whitish bloom, and also whereas blackberry stems are usually fiercely thorny, the spines on dewberries are usually more like fine prickly bristles. Dewberry stems are also usually more slender than blackberry, and the leaves are usually paler green. And whereas blackberries may easily grow more than 2 metres tall as bushes, and might climb up over supporting things like trees and fences to a much greater height than 2 metres, the best berries are always out of reach. Dewberries usually max out about 1 metre tall, sometimes a bit more, but usually less. Dewberries are earlier to fruit than blackberries, and can often be found ripening as early as the end of June in the south of England, whereas blackberries are usually about a month later before they begin to ripen. But the flowering seasons for these two plants do overlap, and so these two species, being closely related, can and do hybridize to form plants that have some of the features of both parents, like this one. The druplets are shiny like a blackberry, but they are irregular and sparse like a dewberry, and the bush is also smaller and more slender than a typical blackberry. Sometimes blackberries do that weird partial druplet thing on their own, so this could just be a weird blackberry, but I think this one is a hybrid. Typical blackberry is a bit of a weird thing to say though, because blackberries are quite variable due to their genetic makeup. So typical is more like a spectrum of different things for blackberries. For example, this bush here has fruits that are more tightly clustered than other examples, slightly darker leaves than some other blackberries, and the fruits ripen from green to dark maroon to black, rather than green to bright red to black, which is more usual. The flavour of blackberries is quite variable too in sweetness, acidity and aroma. The blackberries on this particular bush, for example, have a distinct aroma that's similar to ripe pears, probably the result of a higher than usual level of aromatic esters that this particular plant is producing. Somebody did mention in the comments quite recently that blackberry genetics is so messed up and jumbly that essentially you could say every individual blackberry plant is its own species. As I say though, the names Blackberry and Dewberry may refer to other things in other places. Anyway, that was in a nutshell Blackberries and Dewberries in the UK. Comments on the question of AI. So in the video about the medicine scam, the eye cure red root hack thing, really interesting set of comments there. Lots of people very, very confident that the video was AI generated. I'm still undecided. There were certainly some little things in there that made me wonder, but if that video is AI generated, it's better than the best technical demos I've seen, because even things like VO3, Google's VO3, I've watched the technical demos of that, and these are the showcase pieces that the people who made the algorithm are putting out to demonstrate how good it is. It immediately comes across as AI generated to me. So when I watch the demo reel for VO3, there's just something about it that I can immediately say, yes, that's AI. The things I can point at, and some things I can't point at, but some of the things I can definitely point to is some of the faces are too textured. They're just too real. And some of the background separation seems artificial. So sometimes it's not just depth of field, but the separation of subject and background just is obviously artificial to me. And sometimes the movement of the human figures especially the head movements and the hand movements in VO3 footage seems a bit swimmy to me. There probably are other little subtle tells that I'm picking up on in VO3 footage that I couldn't possibly describe. Anyway, one of the things, but lots and lots of people pointed out things in that eye quackery video that they thought were tells for AI that I really just don't think they are. One of them was the guy with the lab coat. People were saying his lab coat looks a bit stiff and like it's not moving or draping, which could mean it's AI, I suppose, but also it could be completely consistent with that lab coat never having been worn before. He's an actor performing the part of a doctor. He's not a doctor. So he's taken a lab coat out of the wrapper and put it on without ironing it, without washing it or anything like that, and so he's wearing a starched brand new lab coat. Not surprising that it doesn't look like one that's been worn and is draping properly over him. Lots and lots of things like that. One of them was the pendulums on the clock in the background aren't moving. And when I first saw that comment, I thought, oh yeah, maybe that is a tell that they're AI, because I wouldn't expect necessarily an AI video generation algorithm to get details like background details like that right or consistent. So maybe the fact that those clocks don't have moving pendulums is a tell for AI, but I don't think it is, because I think if that was AI generated, those clocks wouldn't have readable faces. The face of the clock would be incoherent, most likely. I think probably what's more likely happened there is that is either just a photograph background, and I mean maybe it is still AI generated footage and it's been generated from a still photo, so that's why the pendulums are not moving. But I think it's probably more likely that that's a human on Fiverr and he stopped those clocks because the noise of their ticking would pick up on the recording he's making. I used to do that when I was making videos in a room that had a pendulum clock. I used to stop the clock when I was recording stuff. Otherwise, you'd hear it ticking in the background of the video. On some videos, you could hear it ticking and people noticed. I mean, the other possibility is that those clocks might be decorative. The pendulum might not be operative. They might just be a little quartz clock with a fake pendulum in there just to look good. But as I say, there were lots and lots and lots of comments like that in that video where people said, it's obviously AI because the guy's got no ears. And that was because they were faking a Zoom call with a blurred background, and it was the cutout of the blurring that was doing it. Most of the things that people pointed to don't seem like obvious AI tells, and I'm concerned about this because not just because I think people are right or wrong about this, but we are now getting to this point where AI generated video and real video are sufficiently close that we can be arguing about whether it's real or not, and we can be uncertain about whether it's real or not. And whichever one of us is wrong here, we're either making the wrong assumption about something being AI or the wrong assumption about it not being AI. And so we're in this territory now where I think we're going to start to doubt things that are real as well as believe things that aren't. And that concerns me. One thing in particular, although this comment wasn't about that, but let me show you this bit of footage in a minute. Somebody said, can you say what the handsome dark tree in the background is at 1959? It looks like giant broccoli. So this was in the walk video that we did at Upcern. And I noticed when I was editing the video, and it's because I zoomed in on some GoPro footage to show those pheasants that were walking along the track. And when it was zoomed in, the compression artifacts on this tree made this tree look just not real. Here's the footage. So zoomed out, everything looks fairly normal. But when you zoom in, that tree looks like, you know, I could imagine somebody saying that tree's AI generated, and somebody pointing at the video and saying, you're using AI generation because that tree's obviously not real. So I think we're in this weird, slightly dangerous territory now where the line is sufficiently blurred, and it's not about people being smart or stupid. It's about the technology having improved to a certain point, plus all sorts of other things happening in normal video anyway, like compression artifacts, upscaling that's being applied to normal real video as well, that bring them into this overlap territory where we can't necessarily tell what's real anymore, and we are in danger of suspecting fake things that are in fact real. Lots of comments on the little pandy, fake cuddly panda video. One was the comment that linked somebody who reviewed it, and it was exactly what I predicted. The guy ordered it and he got this tiny little beanie panda, really cheap, obviously from AliExpress, exactly what I predicted. But because of the keywords I used in that short warning people about this pandy scam, it was my hope and intention that that ad would get placed against my video, so that we'd end up with people either being served the ad and then being served my short video saying how that ad is a scam, or vice versa, watching the scam video and then immediately being served the ad that is no longer going to be effective because you've just had the scam warning. That was my hope and intention, was that those things would get paired up and put together. And lots of comments to the effect that that did actually happen. So I'm quite happy about that. Not because the video got views, but because the video got views in the right place. It means the video was effective in making that scam ad a little bit more impotent. Is there something you aren't good at? How about a video of bloopers to show us that you aren't successful in everything you do? I truly enjoy your videos. Good one, actually. And I think it's really important that people realise I'm not some charmed individual who only ever experiences success. I suppose when I do set out to record something, it most often works because I'm doing it on purpose. And I've already thought it through and planned it and organised it. So when I'm recording video, I tend to be a little bit more organised and deliberate than I would do in real life. Not always, though. But more often than not, when I fail, when I'm recording a video, it fails in a not very interesting way. And I don't show those failures not because I'm embarrassed by those failures. I don't show those failures because I'd rather show you interesting things. However, just to demonstrate that I am indeed a fallible human, and you really shouldn't put me on any kind of pedestal, here's a bit of footage that never made it into the most recent cooking challenge video. The one where I had to cook everything in a cake pop maker. So, you know, like on every episode of Columbo, there's a moment, perhaps more than one moment, where he says, "I'm really sorry, sir, there's just one more thing." Well, I feel a bit of that myself today. And the thing I haven't done yet in this video is make anything that's really presentable. So I'm going to try to remedy that now. So using some of the bits and pieces we've already done in this video, we're going to make quiche pops. So I'm just cutting up, this is some cabanossi here. This is a Polish slim salami. I'm just going to cut this up into tiny little rounds like that. So this is going to be the meaty flavour. This is going to function like a miniature chorizo, so I'll cut those into tiny rounds. And then I've also got some of that Grana Padano hard Italian cheese. It's really nice cheesy cheese without adding too much volume to the thing we're cooking. I've got 1 egg. I've got some chopped chives here. These were frozen, so they're a little bit soggy, but they'll be fine. My little currant tomatoes and some milk. So I'm also going to actually slice these little mini tomatoes in half, which is a bit fiddly, but there we go. Tiny halved tomatoes. Right, anyway, there's the tomatoes ready and cut. Before I do the pastry, actually, I'm just going to beat this egg. And we're going to loosen that with a little bit of milk, just a little splash, perhaps about 1/3 of the volume of the egg. Now I'm not going to need much pastry for this, because these are only going to have a bottom crust. So I think we're probably only talking about that much pastry. Oops, that's not good. And I am going to roll it out thin again, because we're making little quiches, but they're not going to be blind baked. Also that, we should be able to get 12 little circles out of that. And for this I am going to use the smaller pastry cutter, so this is going to go 1, 2, 3, back in a moment. Right, that's 12 plus 1 spare. And I'll just get these into the machine before we clear away the pastry board. So I want these to go in as neatly as possible. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time getting this right. I can adjust the crust inside the divot. Anyway, you get the idea. So into each one of these little pastry shells, 4 of those little pieces of cabanossi. It'd be lovely to put more, but there just isn't room. That won't go to waste. A little bit of the frozen chives. I'm putting this down the bottom because the cheese is going to go on top of it, and that will stop this from floating up and burning. And again, you know, this is a proper fiddle and a faff, but the objective here is to get something, to get a result that is presentable. You know, little mini quiche canapé type of things, ideally. Now this is going to be tricky, but yeah, it's going to be very tricky actually. So I might just have to bunch that a little bit. I've grated way too much cheese, but again, it won't go to waste. Now, part of the reason for diluting the egg with milk is because I do need it to run down through these strands of cheese and fill the thing. That is going to be tricky to deploy as well, so I've got an idea for that. So now how are we going to get this egg mixture into here? Well, turkey basting pipette. So just a little bit of the egg mixture and then apply it ever so sparingly, like that. And then I'll just let that soak in a little bit. I'm only taking up a little bit at a time so that we don't make a huge mess. Now, I've already seen that I've gone over the edge of that one there, so that's potentially not going to be all that presentable. Let's hope I get some kind of maybe 50% yield of presentable mini quiches out of this. I'm sure they'll all taste good, but the objective here is to try to make something with a bit of finesse, something a bit presentable. So as I'm giving each one of these a little bit of time to soak in, I can go back and then top it up with a bit more of the egg mix. Maybe I should have put the egg on before the cheese, but I think the cheese would then just burn on the top. Right, I think we're getting close to full up now. Just make sure they're all equally filled. Right, I think that's about it. And then the final touch is in each one of these, they're going to get 3 little slices, or 3 little halves of tomato. Wow, which in itself is a fiddly little feat. All right, what do you reckon? Chances of success, but these are going to have 5 minutes baking, and that's it. None of this turning off and turning on business. We'll just turn that on, close that up, start the timer. Back in 5 minutes. Okay, so a great deal of steam is being produced here. Obviously we've got all of that liquid from the egg and the tomatoes, and potentially the chives, I suppose, as well. We've got 17 seconds left. What are we going to see when we look in here? I have a feeling my high aspirations for presentation here may be thwarted. Should I leave it to cool before I open it? No, I think I should open it now and see what the damage is. Oh my gosh. Well, that's a disaster. Nearly all of the tomatoes are stuck on the top surface. Not a single one of them is what I would describe as presentable. The egg seems rather undercooked on most of them, and the pastry, I think, is burned. Well, so the most conforming example is this one here. I don't think it's even going to come out. I think that cheese overspill has baked it onto the... Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, that was a disaster. Don't think that's even edible. Burnt on the outside, raw in the middle. What a mess. I will try to get one of these out that I can taste. Maybe that one. Yeah, but they've kind of, all the eggs just boiled out and the pastry has burned and stuck. Oh boy, this is going to take some cleanup. Hopeless. Absolutely hopeless. So yeah, this is a complete disaster. It's not coming out very easily. As we saw in the disassembly, this is not a thing I can take the plates off and soak them easily. So, undercooked pastry, burnt pastry, all of the tomatoes just stuck inside the lid. Let's see if I can get one out so I can just... I think I might have actually destroyed... Oh no, there we go. So there's one that's come out. Well, is that intact? That is not my vision for this dish. So the egg just hasn't... The pastry's puffed up. Yeah, I think maybe shouldn't have used puff pastry. That's the problem. The pastry's puffed up and ejected the fillings, and that's the main issue. So maybe I should have made my own short crust pastry, or made them crustless. Anyway, I'm going to taste this one. There are undercooked bits of pastry in there and burnt bits of pastry. A little bit of burnt cheese. It does taste vaguely like a quiche, but very disappointing. A revised score of 0 out of 10. An absolute unmitigated disaster, and made worse by the fact that my hopes and aspirations were so high. So yeah, I left that segment out of the cooking challenge that it was recorded to, partly because there just didn't seem to be much point adding in such a dramatic fail at the end of the other things, which were relatively successful, but also because the edit was already 40 minutes long, and that is the kind of standard length for episodes in that series. So anyway, there we go. There is a proper fail from me. All sorts of hopes and pretensions and things going in. I mean, I really did think this was going to be a dish that had some finesse and with these little beautiful quiches were going to come out of it. And what a disastrous result it was. In hindsight, that was obvious. It was just the puff pastry I used. The puff pastry puffed up, ejected all of the fillings, and everything went wrong from there. Maybe I'll try that again with some homemade short crust in a future video, but probably not just right now. Have they put you under a hosepipe ban yet? If so, how are doing the tomatoes? So we haven't got a hosepipe ban here. I'm under Wessex Water, and Wessex Water doesn't generally issue hosepipe bans. Water is short though, and we have had kind of advice on how to save water from the water company. But yeah, we haven't had a hosepipe ban yet. If we did have a hosepipe ban here, though, I can still use the automatic watering system in the greenhouse because that's technically not a hosepipe, it's a drip watering system. So you're allowed to, even when there's a hosepipe ban, you're allowed to use a hose-fed drip watering system, as long as it's on something like a timer that shuts off the water automatically, and as long as it's not spraying water into the air, where some of it would evaporate before it even hits the ground. So it needs to be on a drip system. And because that's what I've got, if we did have a hosepipe ban, I would still be able to keep the tomatoes alive with that watering system because it complies with the exceptions. Anyway, also somebody said, how are your current tomatoes going? In my experience, they're slow to grow, but then they absolutely take off. When the early tomatoes are succumbing to mildew or finishing fruiting, the current tomatoes keep on producing well into autumn and have been productive through winter. I'm in Sydney, but I reckon you could keep them going in your greenhouse. So yeah, tomatoes in the greenhouse are actually in full swing now, doing really well. So let's go and have a look at that. The tomatoes we're growing this year include several varieties. There's a small cherry tomato called Coralic, which is this one. That's actually one of the smaller fruits. These are pretty good. They've got a really nice flavour. They're quite seedy, but thin-skinned. Very nice tangy tomato flavour. You've also got these, which are, I forget the variety name, but I think it had currant or berry in the name. I forget which it was. These are really, really prolific plants, and they produce great long strings of these tiny red currant sized tomatoes. Again, really good flavour, nice and sweet. And they just go pop in your mouth. The trouble with these is they're actually really rather difficult to harvest. So yeah, these currant tomatoes, berry tomatoes, whatever you want to call them, hugely productive, but such a fiddle to pick because they don't all ripen at once on the stalk. There's the strig, great long chain of them. And I'm finding that as I pick the ripe ones off the top, it's very easy to knock the unripe ones off the bottom. And so I'm losing some of the fruit. Not a lot. I mean, it's not a big deal, but yeah, very productive. Now, the thing with tomatoes is I grow, every year when I grow tomatoes, I get kindly and well-meaning advice from people who grow tomatoes about what I should and shouldn't do with them, and it's usually about leaf pruning and pinching outside shoots and things, which is a thing that I always mean to do when we start, and it always kind of falls by the wayside by the time the season is on us. So if I've ignored your advice about growing tomatoes, please don't take it personally. And there is the other thing about the fact that I get lots of advice from well-meaning, helpful people on how I should do a thing, and I literally can't do all of that advice because usually the superset of all of the advice people give me contains many, many contradictions. I can't do everything you tell me to because you're all telling me different things. So don't let me stop you from posting your comments with helpful ideas and tips on how to care for tomatoes, or indeed anything else. But just perhaps please understand that if I don't do the thing you said, it's nothing personal. As you're picking the ripe fruits off the truss, the green ones tend to get knocked off as well. And then there's this. This is a variety called cream sausage, and it's a very pale yellow. When they're ripe, they're pale yellow. When you pick them, they're almost sort of creamy white. They're supposedly a paste tomato, so supposedly for cooking. Of course, nothing to stop you eating them just as salad tomatoes. Quite an interesting colour, not that exciting on flavour. Now, you might think that's just because they're not red, but some of the most tasty tomatoes I've eaten, homegrown, were Golden Sunrise. They were yellow tomatoes. So there's not necessarily an exact correlation between colour and flavour. These are all right, though. To be perfectly honest with you, I only grew them because I thought the name was funny. Cream sausage is a weird name for a tomato, but you can see why it's called that. The Cape gooseberries have just really taken over this half of the greenhouse, and they've produced a lot of leaf. not a lot of fruit. There are fruits in here somewhere. There's one. There's another one. But really we haven't had very much. I haven't had any ripe fruit off of this. I got a lot of leaf. That probably means it's a little bit too well fed down there in the soil, and it's just growing all this vegetative growth. So I'm not sure that was a good idea to move that into the greenhouse. It's really taken over. In fact, it's grown out through the window. It's gone a bit crazy. Anyway, I've got tomatoes to pick. The other thing potentially of note is, yeah, this approach is chaotic and messy. It's also very low effort, but also, can you argue with success? That's today's tomato harvest from these plants. I'll have the same again tomorrow. I'll probably have similar harvests pretty much every day or every other day until the end of September. It works well enough. And also, as I say, my approach to tomato management is very low effort, which I like. In case you're thinking these tomatoes look a little bit on the pale side, the big ones, I have picked them as soon as they start to turn colour. Because with the big tomatoes, once they've started to turn, they'll ripen off the plant very quickly. Also, if I remove them from the greenhouse, that's the danger of a woodlouse or a slug taking a bite out of a big tomato mitigated. One little bite from a slug or a woodlouse and the fruit will rot before it fully ripens. So I'm mitigating that by picking them as soon as they show colour, take them indoors. The little ones don't matter so much, they ripen really quickly on the plant. Elsewhere in the garden, things are perhaps not quite so good. The very, very dry weather, we're having a prolonged drought, is taking its toll on the courgettes. I am watering them, but you can see they're kind of past their best now. Still producing a little bit. This Tromboncino gourd hasn't produced anything worthwhile. There have been a few female flowers on it. That one doesn't look like it's been pollinated properly. I don't expect we're going to get anything from this thing. I'm disappointed with the small amount of growth it put on as well, actually, compared to how well the courgettes have done. So probably something I've done. But anyway, I've planted here some pak choi, but I'm not sure that it's going to be sustainable to keep watering these. So we'll see how they go. We could really do with a bit of rain, but the soil is just so thirsty that I'm not sure it's going to be really practical and sustainable to keep these watered. The littlest watercress farm is looking pretty sad, actually, and again, this is the heat. The hot weather means that the water in the reservoir there warms up during the day, and I don't think the watercress is enjoying the warmth of the water. I think in reality this watercress farm, although it's been an interesting experiment, is too small to really be practical. We have had some reasonable cropping off of it, but yeah, it's too small, I think, as a way of growing watercress at home. There's not enough thermal mass in the water, and so the water warms up. Watercress doesn't like warm water. I've also here planted some more chard, some spinach and some lamb's lettuce, but again, I just think it's going to be a struggle to keep this adequately watered. And I can't just spot water the little plants. I have to water the soil that I want them to extend their roots out into, so I have to water the whole bed in the hope that they will extend their roots out into the soil. But it's, like I say, the conditions are just so hot and dry that the amount of water I have to put on here to keep this rather well drained soil moist is verging on the ridiculous. On the last video, where I had a little bug behind the front glass of my computer monitor, someone said, I think a singular thrip is called a thrips. Most people don't say thrips for a single thrip because it makes no sense, of course. Now I looked that up and you are in fact quite right. So yeah, the insect called thrips, if you've just got one of them, it's still called a thrips, which makes no sense at all to me, but language is like that. So yeah, the thing I had behind the front glass of my monitor is called a thrips, which just seems intuitively wrong, but it is the correct term. But I suspect I will get that wrong again in future. The thrips, by the way, did eventually make its way out of my screen on its own, at least out of the visible part of the screen anyway. Suggestion on the fossil display thing, you would get on very well with museum clear adhesive. It's a specialised clear glue that's non-damaging. Thank you for that. I'll look into that. So museum clear adhesive. I watch a few different channels that do restoration of historic artworks.
And they always use these kind of restoration grade adhesives or varnishes or whatever. And critically, all of those sorts of things are made in such a way that they can be undone. So they're for restoring or repairing or maintaining or preserving things that are delicate, but they're usually of a formulation that doesn't degrade over time, doesn't turn into something else. But also, if at some point in the future somebody decides that that restoration was inappropriate or could be done better, or just needs to be undone so the thing can be seen in its historic reality, those museum grade or conservation grade adhesives and materials can all be easily undone. And now onto the puns and dad jokes section. Here are some that I enjoyed in no particular order. So, yes, shredded lettuce, or as I like to call it, shredders. I don't think I'd have thought of that one. Is a replanted red onion a red-onion? Oh, on the subject of onions.
In this glass here, I've got some bases of spring onions. So if you probably might have seen this as a life hack in some video or other, but if you're cutting about that much off of the bottom of a spring onion, a green onion or scallion, and you just put them in water for a few days, they start growing. Now often in videos about this, people are just growing them in water and then harvesting a few little green shoots off the top there. I don't think that's really worth doing, but if you plant these in soil now, they'll grow into another full onion, because onions are a perennial bulb and the entirety of the plant's anatomy is kind of compressed into this basal plate here. This piece here is the third time around for it. So this was a spring onion I bought in the shops. I sliced off the bottom and planted it out in the garden. It grew another onion, which I harvested and used in a recent video. And then I've cut the bottom off of that and put it in water, and it's sprouting again. Now I'm going to go and plant that in the garden again, and it will grow more onions. It looks like it's going to split into 3 bulbs at this point, but that will grow more onions, and that'll be the third time around for this plant, and that's what it wants to do. So anyway, I'm going to go and plant these somewhere in the garden now. Now I'm not really one for viral life hack nonsense such as you might see online, but this one does actually work. And if you've got a bit of space in the garden and you're cutting this much off your spring onions anyway, it's worth doing, I think, because it works. It does actually work. So that's those 3 planted there. I find that they do need a little bit of growing on in glass in water first. That just helps them get their roots freshened up and get a good start. I will just give those a little bit of water just to start them off and settle the soil around their roots. But if you've got the space in the garden, and as I say, if you're cutting that bit of the spring onion off anyway, it kind of seems silly not to. These take up very little space because they grow vertically up. They'll just grow straight up. So they take up very little space. So yeah, I think out of all of those kind of viral life hack things that you see online, this one seems the most worthwhile to me. So those will grow they'll grow a spring onion, so it'll be a green onion that you can pick and use as a salad onion, or if you leave them long enough, the tops will die down and you'll end up with this, that's the remains of one that I grew the first time round, and it's just 2 little white onions. And I will just pick those now, take them inside and use them on a pizza or something like that. They're small, but they're rather nice. And yeah, if I just carefully cut the bases off and put them in water, being harassed by a horsefly, so I'm coming here. So yeah, I'll just cut the bases off of those and put them in water, and they'll grow another onion. And I think we can probably do that throughout the summer, as long as there's warm enough weather to grow them. Once it gets cold in the winter, they probably won't do very much. But I think I'll keep trying. So yeah, infinite onion hack, I suppose, is the short version. So this one here, which I also just dug up, you can actually really see the basal plate because it's a little bit accentuated there. So that basal plate there is the entirety of the plant organism. This bulb up here is just leaves. Leaves that have been modified to be layers that encircle what we think of as the onion. But really, this part down here is the kind of stem and structure of the plant. You may have noticed that this is two onions growing from one basal plate, and that's because that's what bulbs want to do. One of the ways in which bulbous plants reproduce is by splitting, by dividing like this. This obviously has happened in response to injury. So when we sliced off the top of the leaves, it's produced 2 shoots out of the basal plate. But that does mean there were 2 little crowns inside of there waiting to grow. So even if they were left alone, bulbs will generally split and divide like this anyway. They just get to a certain size and they start dividing. In fact, maybe you've sliced open an onion and found that inside it's got multiple bulbs preparing to divide inside of it.
Next one was about crab sticks, or seafood sticks. So as good as chicken of the woods is, nothing beats a good cheese string of the sea. On my fruity clafouti in the last random stuff video, I can't believe I didn't think of this one actually. Clafouti. Thank you for that. But taking the crowning place, another one I should have thought of for the video, but really didn't. It is in the thumbnail now for various other reasons. But this was blackberry and plum crumble, and someone said I would like to try a blackberry plumble. Anyway, that's all we have for today. I hope that's been interesting. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.